Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more automation, the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1986. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go ahead and update the Edison Asteroid to the current year period, which is 1986. And to do that, we're going to have to start pretty much from scratch, as you have to do every time you change the year of any particular model, as a car model can only really hold that 1 year as its date. And if you mess with it, that messes with everything. So go ahead and check our or select our pickup truck body, as the Asteroid is a pickup truck. And we're going to go with our chassis. We're going to go with the ladder chassis. Corrosion resistant steel. I haven't really checked out the difference between corrosion resistant steel and galvanized steel. It looks like production units is higher, tooling cost is lower, material cost is higher, and corrosion is better. Corrosion resistance is better than what you got with galvanized steel. But obviously galvanized steel is better than normal steel as far as corrosion resistance. Galvanized steel was a kind of older school method of getting that corrosion resistance, and I think it stopped being used a lot. A lot of the reason it stopped being used is because, if I remember correctly, galvanizing steel is not very environmentally friendly. I think they use a lot of chemicals that I don't really remember exactly, but I think I remember or recall that the process is not very environmentally friendly. In any case, let's go ahead and do a front longitudinal setup. McPherson strut in the front, and we're going to go with solid axle leaf, as that gives us the best load capacity, and that's why we're going to choose that. Now, the panel material is going to be made out of corrosion resistant steel. Again, getting that nice corrosion resistance, I think, is important with a pickup truck, but I think we've been doing that with a lot of our models. Maybe I missed this option for some of our earlier models, but definitely most of our models are going with the more corrosion resistant steel, which I think is good. You know, you don't want to have a reputation for having a car that rusts to pieces, obviously. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and do the styling off camera, and I'll come back when that's done. And we're back. And one thing I'd like to point out, and this is something I kind of have figured out more recently, make sure before you put your engine in that you've selected your drive type. It's not necessary to do that step, but it seems like you have a lot more problems if you do it the other way around, you selecting your engine, then selecting your drive type, as the engine doesn't usually typically get mounted appropriately, and sometimes it will give you messages saying that your engine doesn't fit when it will if you have chosen the drive type beforehand. So make sure you do that. But in any case, for the styling, I kind of went with this nice blue color. And the front end, I went with kind of a dual headlight setup, but stacked rather than horizontal. They're set up vertically, and then indicators underneath that. And we kind of got a pretty nicely chromed up grille there on the front there as well. The sides, we just essentially have pretty plain, plasticky looking door handles. And for the rear, pretty simple, just, a place for your license plate, your tail lights and indicators, and even your reverse lights set up in this style here. Goes along the outside, so you don't really have to worry about, wiring things up through the tailgate here. And then you have a little badge there, of course. So that's pretty much more or less the styling. So let's go ahead and pop in. I've already thrown in the 6-cylinder engine, which we can see mounted in there, right there. Oop, if we don't have a light in our way, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the trim. Let's look at the engine, though, just to see what kind of power we produce. It's something I've been doing a lot more recently, and I think it's a pretty good idea to do so. So here is the power output. We've got 153 horsepower and 184 foot-pounds of torque. And, of course, the torque is what we're mostly looking for with this engine. So let's go ahead and jump into our trim. And we're going to do a couple different trims for this. I'm probably only going to make, like I did with the last pickup truck, only a kind of a standard trim. This is more a worker's, like a working truck. It's not really necessarily a luxury truck, which we see a lot more in modern times with, especially nowadays where you've got the very nice, luxury interiors and everything. We're not going to really go that route, but we're going to make essentially a manual version and of the two different engines we're going to be mounting and an automatic version, and that's pretty much it. We're just going to have a standard trim. So go ahead with our manual single clutch. I think we'll probably end up go with a 4-speed manual here. We might change our mind later, but I think that's probably going to serve us the best. If we remember from last time, we had a real problem with wheel spin in our first time that we did our pickup truck. Again, I think with the way wheel spin works at the moment, we're going to have a lot of problems with that, but I'll do my best to kind of mitigate that. Let's go ahead and get these tires inflated up here. It looks like 195s is about as wide as it will let me go without the wheel arches modified, and clearly that's not going to be wide enough for a pickup truck, so we're going to have to mess with that, obviously. But medium compound tires, steel, and we'll just go with your basic, kind of steel wheel design there that you would obviously put a hubcap over top. We'll go with our brakes. I'm going to go with solid 2 pistons in the front, my usual setup. Make those as big as they're allowed. And we're going to go with drums in the rear. Now, we might make the wheels bigger than they currently are, and which will allow us to have bigger brakes. But again, I'll think about that as time goes on. I don't really want to make it more than 16-inch rims, which I believe it's 15 right now. So that's going to be kind of where we're at, because bigger rim diameter is more a modern thing as well. All right, moving along, we're going to do... now we have that skid tray, and I didn't really pay attention to this before. I think we're going to end up going with the skid tray. Now, I don't know what this does for us stat-wise, but I'm going to assume it gives us more off-road stats. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I don't know how it also affects aerodynamics. It doesn't really tell you here, and that'd be nice to have some kind of tooltip that told us. It does look like it's pretty heavy, though. But that's okay. Pickup trucks are supposed to be heavy. All right, so let's get rid of some of this. Maybe that will help with our weight distribution, although I'm not exactly sure on that. Obviously, I usually only use a little bit more cooling airflow than we really need, which I usually go about 10 over. But it looks like with how much cooling airflow we have, we're going to be going quite a bit more than that 10, but that's okay. All right, moving along. I'm going to give us 3 seats in the front, even though, again, with the manual transmission with a 4-speed, that would be unlikely. But I'm going to do it anyway. And we're going to go ahead with the standard interior, as I said, standard cassette, and power steering standard. But none of these other selections I'm going to make. And I'll do standard safety. Okay, moving along. I want progressive springs. I'm going to go twin tube, but I might go gas monotube later. I'll have to think about it. Passive sway bars, and I'll go with the normal preset, and I'll work with that, and I'll kind of experiment. Obviously, I do a lot of my tweaks off camera. And there's our initial numbers, not looking particularly good, but we'll work with it. And as I said before, since that update, a lot of the numbers have changed from my old models, and I don't remember if the Asteroid would have been one of the last models I made. I don't know if that was made pre or post update. So there may be quite a bit of difference between the two as far as the numbers. So I don't know if we'll be comparing those. In any case, I'm going to do all of my tweaks here, and we'll be back with the trims in a minute. All right, we're back with all the trims. So as I said, I made 2 variants of each engine mounting. So we've got the 232s, which are our straight 6s, automatic and manual, and then we have the 5.7, which is our V8, automatic and manual. Now, I did kind of play around with another ultimate trim where I used all-wheel drive, and that's pretty much it. That's the only change I made. So I kind of have a little bit in my mind what the stats of that particular model were, or trim, I guess I should say. But I didn't end up saving it, mostly because it was just that fooling around. And if you're wondering why I didn't make an all-wheel drive trim, is I honestly don't think that would be appropriate in this time period. As a pickup truck from this time period would more likely have 4-wheel drive, not all-wheel drive. And as that is not an option at the moment, I'm not going to take it. So I'm just going to keep with rear-wheel drive and not select all-wheel drive. Now, more modern pickup trucks, a lot of them are going to have an all-wheel drive system. Some of them it's even what you would call a part-time all-wheel drive system, which again isn't in the game, so that's another thing that we can't really replicate. In any case, as far as the stats go, drivability comes in at 36.2, sportiness comes in at 6.5, comfort at 27, prestige at 18.5, and safety at 39.1. Now, again, you're going to have to expect these numbers to be lower than the kind of numbers we were getting in the past, and that's due to that brake fade issues and other things. And I tried to do a couple things to address that. But in any case, let's go ahead and go across the board here at what we have selected. So, again, you already know I went with a manual 4-speed gearbox as far as this goes. Top speed, I put it up at 119 miles an hour. Now, honestly, I put it beyond probably where I would have wanted to put it. But again, you have to keep into mind how bad wheel spin is. And trust me, it's bad. Because even with this inline 6, with as heavy of a car as this is, I had to bring my spacing all the way down to 35. Now, as we discussed, this is only, 150-something horsepower engine and 184 foot-pounds of torque. Now, I'm going to assume the torque is what they really use to measure how wheel spin affects your vehicle, because that kind of makes sense. But still, I'm going to show you some things so that we can kind of discuss how I feel about wheel spin that, kind of goes along with what I've always been saying, that I think wheel spin is way too harsh, way harsher than it needs to be. The fact that I have to go go down on the spacing this much, make that first gear so long, kind of ridiculous, and it really hurts us in the 0 to 62 times and in other places. Okay, so moving along. So I set up the wheels. I put the tire widths as wide as they possibly could be. This is as wide as one thing I didn't mention is I made the manual locker for the differential. That gives us more off-road ability. In any case, moving along. And I think that's really the only difference between an open differential. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, moving along. So a medium compound road this is meant for on-road travel, as most pickup trucks that you buy from dealerships are going to be, unless it's some kind of off-road variant. They're not going to come with the off-road tires and everything. That's something that you could buy independently, aftermarket tires and what have you. But as far as the tire widths, these are as wide as I can get them. Front as wide as it can be. Rear as wide as it can be. Now, I know the front doesn't really matter as far as the wheel spin's concerned, at least as far as the game's concerned. But the rear is as big as I can make them. This is as big as the game allows. I mean, I didn't try and go for more wheel diameter here, just see if it would allow more. But 255s was pretty much as big as it would allow me to have. And even with that, my wheel spin was pretty much, out of control high. And it's even worse with the V8. I ended up giving it a 16-inch rim because I wanted to have more braking power. And as a matter of fact, the rim offset just appeared, and I never gave this car a rim offset. So just like before, we have magic rim offset that comes out of nowhere. Okay, so we got rid of that. It didn't look like it really had much of an impact on our stats. All right, moving along. So the brakes, the main reason I did those 16-inch rims so I could get bigger brakes. And even with that, we still have pretty big brake fade. And again, this is a pickup truck. I don't think that it's really that appropriate for me to put super aggressive, race or sports style brakes on this thing. And still, the brake fade is over 3%. And this is as big as the brakes can get. Again, since they've made that recent update change where brake fade is affected by pad type, this is too high. This is way too high for me to have as big a brakes as I can physically put on on this vehicle and still have brake fade that high on my inline 6 variant is not very good. And I don't think any of these brake setups would have been realistic for this. I mean, vented discs on a pickup truck. Again, for this period of time, does that sound realistic? It doesn't, so I'm not going to select it. As far as aerodynamics go, I guess I missed, oh no, okay, this isn't the V8. For a second there, I thought I forgot to change cooling airflow. This is the V6, never mind. I mean, not V6, i6. Okay, I'm confusing myself now. All right, so cooling airflow you've already seen, drag you've already seen, interior you've already seen for the most part here. Now, as far as the suspension goes, I did go with the gas monotube. I talked about that I might go with that. And that did seem to aid off-road ability. And this is your opportunity to see the off-road stats, so keep that in mind. So it's at 36.8 I imagine this is going to be the trim that gets the best off-road statistics, because from what I've seen in the past, our V8 usually doesn't do as well. Now, as far as the suspension, I went with the normal preset. I tried the off-road preset, and pretty much all that happened is I gained, I think it was from the normal preset, I gained something like zero .4 points in off-road, and it was to the detriment of every other stat on this. So, not really, in my opinion, the best move. So I instead went with the normal preset, and I kind of did tweaks from there. I softened up the spring stiffness in the rear. I increased the damper stiffness both in front and rear, but I made it more front biased because, that we had quite a bit of bump going on in the front. That's something that I've been doing a lot more with my rear-wheel drive car setups, and I think that's something I'm going to continue to do, because to have such a harsh front end like that, it doesn't seem good to me, so I kind of tried to smooth that out a little bit. I don't think I did much with the sway bar. The ride height I actually increased. Usually I lower it. In this case, I increased it, and that's going to aid in off-road, and that's one of the main reasons I did that. So let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. I don't know why our stats just bumped up there. Maybe it had to recalculate some things that I did. I don't know. In any case, let's look at our detailed stats. So we have drivability. We have sportiness. We have comfort. We have prestige. And finally, safety. And as per usual, if you want to look at any of these detailed stats, in more detail, go ahead and pause your screen. I'm giving you guys a few seconds so that you can do that, and you can look at all the numbers if you wish. So for the test track, let's go ahead and switch over to the one that we want, which is the airfield track. Now, as far as the top speed goes, not too fast. It's only going a little bit over 100 miles an hour. Our 0 to 62 time is 10.4 seconds. Now, again, that's sluggish, and a lot of that, again, I think if we didn't have as severe wheel spin, it would be faster than this for sure. But this is quicker than a lot of our other vehicles have been, from what I remember. I think I remember, at least for our base engines, a lot of, 11 plus second 0 to 62 times. So not too bad, considering this is our base engine. Weight distribution, not too bad, not too front heavy, considering this is a pickup truck, and that honestly doesn't make sense, but okay, it's not too bad. As far as our cornering G's, again, not too bad for a pickup truck. That's actually pretty good. I think it's better than our Constellation was, or very close to it. So that's kind of interesting to see as well. So let's go ahead and do our time. And I suspect, this is going to be quicker than the 1 minute 50 mark by a pretty significant margin, so we're pretty good there. So let's go ahead and stop that on up, and let's go ahead and jump into our automatic version now. So, again, this is the inline 6 with an automatic transmission, it being the main difference. Everything else is pretty much going to be the same. Now, because this is an automatic transmission, I did have to make a little bit of changes with the spacing, so it's a little bit less aggressive, so a longer first gear. The switch to the automatic transmission is going to give us more drivability and comfort, and we can see that direct comparison here. So we've got 40.6 for our drivability, a 0 for our sportiness, 29.5 for our comfort, and we lose a little bit of prestige, and I'm going to assume that's probably acceleration times and top speeds probably that is coming from. But in any case, you kind of see that direct comparison there. And our 0 to 62 time, though, is definitely worse. And maybe when I was saying that we were quicker, if I remember correctly, the Constellation was all automatic transmission, so maybe not quicker if we look at this comparison here. So, as I said, not much changes beyond that. So the tire setup's going to be the same. I'm just going to get rid of this rim offset, though, because I didn't originally put that on there. I had quite a bit of bugginess with this. As a matter of fact, I had a little bit of trouble getting the tire width in the rear to behave itself, as it reverted to its old tendency of, you would set it up, it would say, okay, that's what I'm going to do, and then you'd flip off and flip back on, and it would be to a completely different measure. It was doing that to me again, which isn't fun, but I was able to eventually get it to behave. Brakes are going to be the same, but due to, I guess, difference in, well, this looks like it's heavier. I'm not exactly sure why we have less brake fade, but we have less brake fade in the automatic transmission version, which I've noted has always kind of been the case with automatic transmissions. Again, I couldn't tell you why. Moving along, again, cooling airflow is going to be the same. The entertainment and interior is going to be the same. Suspension is going to be exactly the same. So not a whole lot of changes, as I said. But let's look at our detailed stats, because there is going to be changes here. So we have drivability. We have sportiness. We have comfort, prestige, and finally safety. Okay, let's look at the test track. So we were below that 100-mile-an-hour top speed. I'm not too surprised by that. Whereas that's where we probably lost our prestige, as I was saying. It's saying our weight distribution looks about the same. Cornering looks about the same. Honestly, I'm not too surprised. Mostly it was just acceleration, top speed. We're going to see the difference here. Let's go ahead and see our time. And again, we're better than 1 minute 50 time, but we almost lost we'll say 2.5 seconds there. All right, so let's jump into our, our V8 version. So we've got the manual version first. And I didn't pay attention to what the off-road was, the stat for the automatic. But I'm going to imagine it was a little bit less than the manual, as that actually does make sense. Okay, so we're here with our manual. And this is where wheel spin is a massive problem. Because if we go to our engine, we can see the numbers here. So we got 220 horsepower and 281 foot-pounds of torque. So almost a full 100 foot-pounds of torque increase over the inline six. And as a result, wheel spin was just massive, out of control. And to cope with that, I obviously had to make the spacing way less aggressive. So our first gear is super long. And we've got a 0 to 62 time of 9.1, which again is sluggish. And as far as everything else, we took a pretty big hit on our drivability. And a lot of that, makes sense. From what I've seen, when you really mess with this spacing and you really lower it, that seems to have a pretty detrimental effect on your drivability. Even though if I were to increase the spacing, we see, because of the wheel spin, we get a massive penalty. There could be other things going on here, but let's just put it this way. With my ultimate trim that I tried out, which would have been the automatic transmission version, I'll point out, I was able to get the spacing all the way up to 51 as a comparison here. And even though it was an automatic transmission, I think I was getting it pretty roughly close to the 0 to 62 time of the manual. So, yeah, and again, that's just to show you how much of an impact wheel spin has on you. And if you're able to reduce it down to a more reasonable level, what you could do with, your vehicle here. Okay, moving along. So, the tire widths were already as big as they could be, so I can't obviously improve this anymore. I mean, I could put sports compound road on here, and that would improve some of the wheel spin, but does that sound realistic on a pickup truck? No. So I didn't do that. Moving along to the brakes. So again, we already maxed out the size of our brakes, so we're seeing a lot more brake fade, and that's where a lot of our points are coming from, the drop there. I said some of it's probably coming from that spacing, but most of it's coming from the brakes. So just to show you, vented discs, we got the brake fade down a little bit closer to where it is with our inline six, and you notice that it's actually points-wise getting closer. You notice that it is almost it's a difference of roughly around 1.5 points. And we still have brake fade. So if we were able to get rid of the brake fade, demonstrating that now, we have no brake fade, it jumps up another almost 2 points. So a lot of our points loss is this brake fade. And as I said, it's just far too aggressive in this version of the game, in my opinion. So obviously we have a glitched out graph, and we also have a more cooling airflow, and that's to allow for the V8. Now our interior, is again the same. We didn't make any changes here. Now we're going to keep an eye on the suspension here. So our off-road comes in at 34.7. If I remember correctly, the inline 6 was something around 36 something. I might draw a comparison here after we've done like the detailed stats and stuff, just to double check that. It might have been 34.8. I don't really remember. It was either 34.8 or 36.8. So because I don't remember clearly, we'll go ahead and take a look at that, because this is the only place you get to see what the off-road stat is, honestly. Other than, I think you can also see it in the overview. But the suspension setup is different because we have a different weight balance, obviously. But I did kind of do everything in the same kind of vein. So the same kind of changes I made with the other, the inline 6 version I did with this. Just, there is a little bit of differences because of weight balancing and everything. Or more weight onto the vehicle. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. So we've got drivability. We've got sportiness. We've got comfort. We've got prestige, and we've got safety. So let's go ahead and hop into the test track here. Cornering G's look a little bit worse. Our acceleration's obviously quicker. Our top speed's obviously more, quite a bit more actually. And weight distribution is a little bit more front heavy, which that makes sense. Let's go ahead and run our time. And it's not all that surprising. We see that it's quite a bit faster than our inline 6 variants. So let's go ahead and stop this, and let's look at really quickly, just so we can make that comparison between the two. Let's look at our inline 6, because I honestly don't clearly remember what our off-road stat was. Okay, so it was 36.8. I was pretty certain of that, but I wasn't for sure. So there we see the difference between the V8 and the inline 6 as far as the off-road stat. And as I said, the suspensions are set up more or less the same, other than some slight differences in weight balancing and things like that. So it's interesting to see such a big drop-off. All right, let's go to our last trim here. So the automatic version of the V8. And interestingly enough, I didn't have to make really any changes to the gearbox at all. Which usually I do with an automatic transmission. Like the spacing would have to be different, the top speed would have to be different. I think they're pretty much the same. But we see 0 to 62 time, 9.8 seconds, quite a bit slower. Drivability, though, we get a big bonus there, 37.9. Sportiness takes a big dip, though. Comfort goes up. Prestige goes down. And, a lot of these are for obvious reasons that they move around like that. Okay, moving along. I also find it interesting that even though I think that the gearbox setup is exactly the same as the manual transmission version, we actually got more economy out of the automatic. Again, that makes no sense, and we're going to have to see that in detail when we actually get to when I look at the comparison on the sheet there. But let's go ahead and the tire setup's going to be exactly the same. The brake setup is going to be exactly the same. It looks like we have less brake fade, though. Again, I don't know why. We have the same cooling airflow setup. And it's not doing the graphs right. So let me back up here and look at these again. There we go. All right, so let's kind of leaf through these quickly. And I think I was on interior again. Nothing changes with the interior. Suspension, nothing changes from the other V8 variant. And then we have our detailed stats. So we're going to go over them with drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally, safety. Okay, so let's look at the test track here. So we did drop off in top speed and acceleration, which again, I kind of expected. Corner G's look about the same. Weight distribution looks about the same. So let's go ahead and run our time. This time isn't all that surprising. It's kind of in between the two, the manual transmission V8 and the manual transmission inline 6. So there we go. All right, so let's look at all of our comparisons here. And let's sort it so we can actually find our comparisons. So I'm not really going to compare any of my other models, maybe the Constellation, just so that we can see like differences in utility and things like that. But in any case, as far as I'm concerned, let's look at the automatic. Oh, I grabbed the wrong asteroid. Where's the right asteroid? There it is. All right. There we go. Okay, so as far as the game is concerned, the gearbox setup was exactly the same between the manual and the automatic. So I'm curious, economy-wise, what the difference is. So the automatic transmission has 0.4 miles per gallon better than the manual transmission, even though they were set up exactly the same, even though the weight is exactly the same. So I'm just going to put it out there. I have actually proven that automatics in this game are more fuel efficient than manuals if you set up their transmissions exactly the same, which makes absolutely no sense at all. If you know anything about an automatic transmission, that makes no sense. A torque converter is going to reduce the efficiency of your engine output. That is a fact. And that would reduce your fuel economy. Your less efficient engine equals less economy. So this makes no sense. It should be the exact opposite way around. A manual transmission should be more fuel efficient than an automatic transmission. But in any case, that's the way the game works. So let's go ahead and go across what we've got here. So drivability-wise, our inline 6 versions are better, both in manual and automatic trims. Where they lose out, though, is sportiness, which makes perfect sense. I mean, you've got a better 0 to 62 time. You've got better top speeds. Makes sense. The sportiness is higher in both those instances. Now, comfort, again, I noticed that we have that dynamic where our inline 6 is a lot more comfortable than the V8. And I'm not exactly sure why that would be. Maybe the loudness of the V8, although I'm pretty sure I set it up. I don't really actually know which one's louder. Let's go ahead and look. You know, we can do that. So let's find our engines, and it helps if they're sorted by year. So we're looking for this engine here, and we're looking for the variant of okay, so we've got this one here. Let's look at loudness. They're exactly the same. So why is the comfort so different? That doesn't make any sense. It's a big difference too. It's not like it's slight. So I don't know how the car being heavier would make it less comfortable. And I honestly don't know. I don't know why there's such a difference in comfort at all. I don't. Maybe it's the way the power comes in. I don't know. But yeah, okay, there you go. And that's something I've seen, across the board pretty much for a lot of trims. And this is not sorted anymore. All right, there we go. All right, moving along. So as I was saying, you have that difference with the comfort. Prestige obviously is in favor in the V8. That makes sense. You have more top speed. You have a more prestigious engine because it's more powerful and everything like that. Safety goes in favor of the weight. So there you go. Reliability, our V8 appears to be more reliable, but it's not by a big difference. It's only a tenth of a point. So, and I think that was just straight up the engine differences. I believe the V8 was more reliable comparatively. So I think that's where the difference comes in. Economy obviously is in favor of the inline 6. That makes sense. It's not by much, though. Only about roughly over a mile per gallon, 1.3, it seems like in both cases. Utility goes in favor of the V8. And again, I couldn't tell you why, because the difference is the V8. Maybe it's more towing ability or something. Again, I have no idea where the utility stat comes from. They don't explain it at all. So, there's that element too. Production units, obviously, go in favor of the inline 6 versus the V8. And the same thing for cost. And as we can see, production unit times for the automatic is longer, but the actual cost is the same. which again I don't agree with. I understand that you could say time is money and more production units is being shown here, but automatic transmissions are more complex. Just straight up, they're more complex. So that makes perfect sense that it makes more time. It takes more time to produce it, but they're also more expensive. Just straight up, they're more expensive. Again, their complexity, how many parts you have, all the stuff makes it more expensive. So it should be both, in my opinion. But again, time is money. But whatever. Okay, so if we compare this to the Constellation, obviously this vehicle is looks to be, I was going to say cheaper, but it depends on your comparison. It looks like we have one trim here of the Constellation that is cheaper, and I don't really remember why. It's the standard. Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So if we look at just standard trims, which would be these two, the Constellation is actually cheaper as far as physical cost, as far as this cost goes, but production unit wise, it takes a lot longer to build. But that's not the main thing I wanted to look at. The main thing I wanted to showcase was the utility. And that I think that we achieved, again, what we were seeking to achieve with our Asteroid, which is having this be the vehicle that has the most utility. And obviously, it is quite a bit better than the Constellation, which I think is the second best. So I think we did a pretty good job there. I definitely think that wheel spin needs reduced. And as long as that continues, I don't know how viable a lot of these builds are, and when you compare them to reality, because I already kind of demonstrated with the Constellation video, how far off of reality these car builds are, where an all-wheel drive car is better in every way. I mean, you see that here with the Ultimate, and I did pretty much the same thing with the Asteroid. I just didn't save that trim because it's not a trim that I wanted to use, but it was the same results as the Ultimate we got before. And I didn't change the brakes like I did with this model or trim here for the Constellation. And I saw the same results. It was better stats pretty much across the board. You were able to do much more aggressive gearbox setup, so a lot quicker 0 to 62 times, everything like that, in spades. So that's where I have a problem, because in real life, any advantages an all-wheel drive car would have, if you have the same vehicle, if everything else is the same, the only difference you have is that all-wheel drive setup. If everything else is the same, every advantage that the all-wheel drive car would get is lost by the fact that it weighs more. And you even see that in this game, that this vehicle here weighs more than its equivalent. It's not much, which again isn't realistic, because usually all-wheel drive systems are quite heavy. Every benefit you would get would be lost by that weight difference. So in that circumstance, and I showed again, if you look at real life examples, and pretty much every example I've ever seen where you have the exact same setup, one with let's say rear-wheel drive and one with all-wheel drive, the rear-wheel drive car will be quicker, and it's because it has less weight. And that's not what we see in this game, and it's not even close to what we see in this game. But in any case, that's kind of my feeling on the the car builder at the moment. It kind of takes a lot of the wind out of my sails. When it comes to this car builder, that it just there's a lot of balancing issues and there's a lot of bugs still with this car builder. But in any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.